I'm often asked, since we started production with Drinking with Dead People, if we come across anything unusual. Well, I mean, headstones aside, there are some interesting ones for sure. Have we captured any EVP, I'm asked? Electric voice phenomena. Ghosts allegedly speaking through microphones to get their spirits and their voices across. I haven't gotten any of that either. Had we seen anybody wandering that should not have been out here? I haven't seen any. If you ever come out to a cemetery, though, it is important for you to remember that you should treat these places with great respect. These are people. These are people like you and I who lived their lives doing one thing or another, trying to survive, have a family, perhaps fought in a war, perhaps died in some unfortunate circumstance. Long or short, their lives are very important. That's sort of the point behind having a monument to this, for people like us to come out and say hello to them, if you will, to recognize them, to, in this case, have a drink with them. But back to the unusual. There was a story, and I have one for you on a more personal note. It involves somebody you don't know, and somebody who I didn't know until recently, and had gotten to know fairly well. You're going to hear the story of a man who may still be living in my home.
Every stone marks a story. Interesting stories, people like you and I. History that should be recounted. Here we toast those you may or may not know, who have gone on before us and left behind their tales to be told. Here we'll be drinking with dead people.
This is the stone of Thomas D. Bird. You don't know him. I barely know him. So why am I sitting here telling you this story? Well, as I mentioned before, behind every one of these stones, or beneath one, is quite the tale. And I have one for you on this one. You see, I didn't know who Thomas was early on, and my acquaintance with him began shortly after my wife and I moved into our home in Cooper Young in Midtown Memphis. It's the historic district that it is. Our home built about 1910. Thomas died 1929. He was 72 years of age. There's no way I would have ever known him. No way I would have ever met him. If you had lined up a series of photographs with people that you knew one of them was Thomas Bird, I'd be able to pick him out of the photograph lineup, even though I've never seen a picture of the man. What makes this especially interesting, at least to me, and having been able to find him here thanks to a friend of mine who did a little research for me, Thomas lived a very interesting life, sort of. He was a carpenter. He was a handyman in the Cooper Young neighborhood. One day, while Thomas was working on a home about 2 blocks from where he lived, he fell off of a ladder, hit his head on a rock in the yard. In those days, they didn't necessarily carry you off to a hospital as much as they would just call the local doctor, who in this particular case bandaged up his head. According to his death certificate, he lingered for several days before he died at the age of 72. And then, of course, later taken here and interred in Elmwood Cemetery here in Memphis. That's about all there is to it, really. So why bring it up? It's a good question. Shortly after my wife and I moved into the home, we started hearing things, noises, footsteps down hardwood floor hallways. The sense that perhaps somebody was looking at you or looking over your shoulder. It's a feeling I'd had several times. And call me a skeptic, because I never really kind of bought into these sorts of things. So I mentioned at the top of this episode, if people, when they asked me if I've heard EVP out here, not to this date, and I certainly haven't seen anything out of the ordinary. It's a cemetery. You treat this with as much respect as you would anywhere else, right? These are people just like you and I. And in this particular case with Thomas, who was carried back to his home where he died, is the home that my wife and I would eventually buy. After a bit of research, we found his death certificate. And we placed that death certificate like a child's painting on the refrigerator, and shortly thereafter, The noises stopped. He moved on. Perhaps, and who knows what happens when you die. Maybe you didn't know that you're dead. Maybe you just felt like you overslept and things felt a little weird. Until you see a document posted on someone's refrigerator many years later that says, "Yo, you don't belong here anymore." And perhaps he went on to his great reward. Shortly thereafter, we were doing some renovations at the home, and under the crawl space, we found a half-pint bottle of what would have been a pretty decent whiskey, I would imagine. I still have the bottle. I cleaned it up, and it sits on a shelf at home. I'd like to think it was his. It probably was. He's the guy that's responsible for putting the addition on our home. We know that to be a fact. So every once in a while, when I get to thinking about it, and a little nostalgic as I might get from time to time, I'll leave out a little shot of whiskey overnight and say hello. And now that I know that he's here, I come and I pay a visit to him. Also, if you'll notice, it's kind of hard to tell, but next to him is his son Hubert, who died at the age of 17 down in Mississippi. Nothing is really known about him. I haven't been able to find too much information about what brought his early demise. But he is here with his father. Interestingly enough, Thomas is married to a woman named Josephine. It's my wife's name. I think he used to pay her a visit from time to time, wondering who this Josephine was in his home. It's a great story. There again, it proves the point that underneath every one of these stones is a fantastic story ready to be told. Be sure and subscribe to us, give us a like, share the show to all those that might be interested in, and join us next time as we go drinking with dead people. See you around, Thomas.